Atrocities are being committed in Gaza. Innocent civilians are being killed. Mass displacement is taking place. So are Israel's actions meeting the definition of a genocide? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. The scenes in Gaza are horrifying. There are calls to end crimes against humanity and even to stop an ongoing genocide. Today, we're asking the big question: is Israel committing genocide?
Signs, banners, placards, even strong language.
Now is the moment for the world to take action against the genocide of Palestinians.
Even within the legal profession, genocide is often described as the crime of all crimes. It may seem like semantics, but war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and genocide are different with unique definitions. Genocide from a legal standpoint comes from the United Nations Convention and is committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group through killing, bodily harm, physical destruction, and inhibiting progeny. Thousands of Gazans have been killed since the fighting started on October 7th. But is their intent a real desire to wipe out those Palestinians, or are they, as Israel says, unfortunate collateral damage? Over 800 scholars believe there is intent. They wrote an open letter to sound the alarm about the possibility of the crime of genocide being perpetrated by Israeli forces, saying, "We do not do so lightly, recognizing the weight of this crime, but the gravity of the situation demands it." Other experts do not believe Israel's actions meet the legal threshold, which is incredibly high. The first conviction for the crime was Jean Kambanda, who pleaded guilty over his role in the Rwanda genocide. There have been subsequent convictions of Khmer Rouge members in Cambodia. And while prosecutors found that the Srebrenica massacre did meet the definition of genocide, the International Criminal Court that the wider violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina did not. The UN Convention was created in the aftermath of the Holocaust to safeguard future generations and say, never again. So will Israel learn the right or the wrong lessons of the past?
Well, earlier I spoke to the Irish politician Richard Boyd Barrett on this very issue, and this is what he thinks.
I think it, without a shadow of a doubt, it is a genocide, because to target an entire population based on their nationality or based on their ethnic background, which is what has been done in Gaza, but actually beforehand, as many human rights organizations, as well as people like myself and the Palestinians obviously have pointed out, this has always been about the targeting of the entire Palestinian population to ethnically cleanse them, to destroy them as a nation. And that's what we are seeing. And if you look at the statements of Israeli politicians, of Israeli military commanders, it is absolutely clear they have targeted the entire population. This suggestion they are going after Hamas is nonsense. What they are actually doing is terrorizing the whole population in order to kill tens of thousands and terrorize the rest of people to leave Gaza. And of course, they're doing it on the West Bank as well, where Hamas are not in power. We've seen this year, the most deadly year for Palestinians on the West Bank, 700,000 illegal settlements, constant push to ethnically cleanse Palestinian people. So this is a regime that is built on war crimes and that it is clearly targeting the entire population to kill them, to terrorize them. And that is, all of these things are crimes against humanity, war crimes, and they fit the definition of genocide in the Rome statutes. And indeed, in Ireland, we are pushing, and in the Parliament over the coming weeks, we have pushed forward motions to say that the Irish government should refer Israel to the International Criminal Court for genocide, for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Well, let's meet our guests. Lara Elborno is an international lawyer and human rights activist. She focuses on human rights and asylum cases. Lara has family in Gaza, currently living under bombardment. She joins us from Paris. In Ontario, in Canada, we have Ardi Imseis, an assistant professor of international law at Queen's University. He's a former official of the UN Relief and Works Agency and was based in Gaza City for 4 years. Also in Ontario is Michael Lynk, a professor emeritus at the Faculty of Law at Western University. He's a former UN Special Rapporteur on human rights in the Palestinian territories. And Joanna Frive is a lawyer who specialises in international criminal law. Joanna has advised the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, and she joins us now from Dublin. I'll come to you first, Joanna, actually. It's the crime of crimes, genocide. That is the phrase that has been used for it. Is this a genocide, what we're seeing in Gaza over the last few weeks?
Absolutely. And to be honest, there are a number of incidents of concern, and we've heard a lot over and over and again, violations of international humanitarian law. Now, what takes violations of international humanitarian law into the area of genocide is the intent. So the intent required for genocide is an intent to destroy in whole or in part a population. Now, out of all of the incidents that we've seen, in some instances, you hear that there are potentially legitimate explanations. They say, oh, Hamas was there, Hamas did that. But for me, the one thing that is clear is the siege. So the withdrawal of water and electricity, when you know that the withdrawal of electricity clearly means that the desalination processes are not working anymore, and you're ultimately cutting off water in a long-term sustained way to civilian population, with the understanding that this will cause drastic destruction of the population. So from my perspective, when you look at the language, when you look at the type of ammunition that has been used, the strategy in the attack, you can say that there is indicia of that intent to destroy.
Lara, I'll come to you. What's your take on this? Is this a genocide?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly why we have seen a number of legal actions that have been brought by experts in the last few weeks. The Center for Constitutional Rights filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court against the Biden administration for violation of the U.S.'s obligations under the Genocide Convention. We also saw the 3 leading Palestinian NGOs file a Article 15 communication before the International Criminal Court calling on it to investigate Israel's genocide in Gaza and also the apartheid regime that Israel oversees. We saw a similar petition filed by 60 politicians before the ICC. And this is consistent with the analyses of scholars that are coming out every day concluding that this is genocide. And I just want to make a point about genocidal intent. There have been over 100 statements made by the Israeli government and military since October 7th that have very clearly indicated genocidal intent. They have told us that the focus is on destruction and not accuracy. They've told us that this campaign is not about surgical strikes, but that they will obliterate civilian infrastructure. And just a few days ago, the Israeli minister, Avi Dichter, very clearly said that Israel was rolling out the Gaza Nakba. So it's very important to understand that this intent cannot be negated by the occasional reference to, no, in fact, we are just targeting Hamas. And a court that is charged with actually deciding whether or not genocide has taken place would have to assess the totality of the evidence, which clearly points in favor of genocidal intent.
Ardi, how do you feel about some of the language we have heard from Israeli politicians? One Israeli politician said that one option would be using a nuclear bomb on Gaza. Another said that the Gazan people, residents, the Palestinians could go to the desert or Ireland. All of this language, you know, how painful has it been for you to hear this?
Well, extremely painful, but more than that, harrowing when one considers the source of these statements. The Jewish state holds itself out and has held itself out for 75 years as a phoenix rising from the flames of the ashes of World War II. And now you have the high command, the highest members of the highest office in Tel Aviv, proclaiming, citing the Bible passages of the Amalek and so on, proclaiming an intent very clearly to possibly commit the crime of all crimes. So this speaks not only to Palestinians and I should hope Israelis, but to all of humanity. Where have we come if we've come to this point? There is something that I think is being lost in all of the discussion, though, around particular crimes against humanity or humanitarian law violations, and indeed genocide, right? We can go down that route. But there's a bigger, I think, very clear operational goal of the Israelis with respect to what's happening in Gaza. They claim to be going after Hamas, which is a political movement. I have no idea how you can end a political movement, and certainly what they've been doing with the force that they've been deploying. It seems to me to be that would only bolster that political movement in the long term. But their actions are very logical when you look at them. They've created complete disarray by bombarding wholesale the civilian population wherever they may be in the Gaza Strip. They've told the Gazan civilian population to flee south. They bomb them on their way to the south. They bomb them in the south. They're starving them through lack of food, electricity, water, and so on. And it seems to me, at the very least, leave aside genocide for the moment, at the very least, the operational plan is to depopulate the Gaza Strip of its 2.3 million people. That, of course, would continue this conflict for another few generations, if not more.
Michael, would you go along with that? Do you think that's what the game plan is here? Depopulate the Gaza Strip?
Well, we saw a very troubling op-ed by two Israeli politicians from the Knesset, published earlier on this week in the Wall Street Journal, calling for the relocation of the population of Gaza elsewhere in the world, either in the Arab world or elsewhere in North America or in Europe. The word was never used in the article, but that certainly meets any classical definition of ethnic cleansing, or in law, mass forced transfer, which is a war crime very clearly. And we also see this, unfortunately, in the framing of what is going on now on this assault on Gaza. Certainly in the European press and in the North American press, the framing is the Israel-Hamas war, when it's very clearly something much different and much deeper than that. This stems not only from a 56-year-old occupation or a 75-year-old dispossession of the Palestinian people. This is meant not simply as a surgical military strike on Hamas. Far from it. It's meant to try to answer a political quandary facing Israel, because Gaza has always been the largest contradiction in the project of Israel. And how do you wind up keeping 2.3 million people fenced in a relatively small area of land? Whenever I speak on Gaza, and particularly over the last 6 weeks, I always ask my audiences, where else in the world and where else in modern history have we ever seen such a large population fenced in with no freedom of movement, with the controlling power dictating who and what goes into the area and who and what leaves the area? There's no other comparable situation in any authoritarian or dictatorial government that I'm aware of in the world today.
Well, very few world leaders are willing to call this a genocide, but one person who has is President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey. Let's have a listen to what he said recently on this issue.
We are facing a genocide. Therefore, right now, hundreds, thousands of lawyers are taking this to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And because Israel is carrying out such a genocide, we will be making an effort to take all the necessary steps regarding the genocide and make the necessary announcement.
Joanna, what's your reading of President Erdogan's words just there?
I think it's absolutely accurate. Both in terms of what's going on, calling out the genocide, and in terms of the steps that need to be taken. We have to understand that justice is the only alternative to war, as it stands. As far as we look back, if we look back at the other cases of genocide that have happened in the last few years, in 1992 in Bosnia, thousands were murdered in broad daylight in front of the cameras. In 1994 in Rwanda, 800,000 people were murdered. And in all these cases, the international community came back after everybody was dead and said, let's not let this happen again, let's have a tribunal. And I think my biggest concern is that what's going to happen to Gaza? Are we going to just let all these people die and then come and say, we should have done something?
Lara,
justice needs to happen now to prevent. The role of justice is not just to come and punish. It is very much as well in a preventative capacity that judicial intervention from the International Criminal Court that has jurisdiction and the International Court of Justice needs to happen now.
Lara, we've got world leaders who won't even call for a ceasefire. What prospect is there for anyone to come out and call this a genocide?
Well, I mean, there's always the question of political will when it comes to international law. I mean, international law is in favor of the Palestinian struggle for freedom. But unfortunately, the international institutions and the governments which have been charged to uphold international law have utterly failed over the last 7 decades to deliver any relief to Palestinians or uphold or honor their human rights. I just want to make a point about impunity. Just yesterday, the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for extended humanitarian pauses in Israel's bombardment campaign in Gaza. And moments after it passed, you had Israel's ambassador to the UN who came out with a statement that this resolution, which is binding under international law, was, quote, meaningless, and that Israel would not comply with it. That has been Israel's approach to the UN since its establishment. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that we are in a crisis of international law and its institutions, and that the International Criminal Court in this moment has to act. Otherwise, it risks rendering itself completely obsolete and ineffective to stop mass atrocities and to uphold the international legal framework, which was developed post-World War II for the very purpose of preventing and sanctioning genocide. That's really what's at stake here. So if world leaders refuse to act, then they should understand very well what they are actually supporting and contributing to.
Ardi, I want to ask you how many millions of people around the world are watching all of this unfold on their TV screens and feeling completely helpless. What can be done with Israel when you've got a country that behaves like this and, as our panel have been discussing, totally disregarding international law?
Yeah, there actually is a great many things that people can do. And first and foremost, speak out, put pressure on your local representatives and on your government, wherever you may be. States have obligations. In this particular case, very base obligation is to ensure respect for the terms of humanitarian law, Common Article 1 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is being violated clearly. But how does that translate? There are also obligations under the Genocide Convention to prevent against genocide from taking place and so on. How does that translate practically? Well, at the United Nations, there are voting patterns and so on, but more, if you like, with more teeth. You have prospects of universal jurisdiction cases where states have obligations because the crimes being committed or alleged to be committed by the Israeli side are what we call core crimes at international law. All states have an interest in prosecuting them or extraditing those who order their commission or participate in their commission to other states who should prosecute them under principles of what we call universal jurisdiction. This could happen in the domestic courts of most state.
Michael, do you think the day will ever come when Benjamin Netanyahu and members of this right-wing Israeli government face justice for what has been done to the people of Gaza?
The track record so far, I'm afraid, is not very good. What I will point to is the fact that after 3 prior assaults on Gaza over the last 15 years, 2008-09, 2014, and during the Great March of Return in 2018. On each of those 3 occasions, the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva commissioned independent international reports to inquire into whether war crimes and crimes against humanity had been committed in the first 2 instances by Israel and Hamas, and in the 3rd instance by Israel during the Great March of Return. And in each of those 3 reports, the independent commission concluded that, yes, war crimes have been committed by both sides in 2008-09 and again in 2014, and by Israel in 2018. And in each of those three reports, it pointed out that the prime reason why these assaults on Gaza and these war crimes continue is the lack of accountability and the culture of impunity. The 2009 report, sometimes known as the Goldstone Report, talked about a justice crisis in the occupied Palestinian territory. So to answer your question, would Benjamin Netanyahu, would senior Israeli military leaders and Palestinian armed groups, where appropriate, ever face justice? My hope is always high, but my expectation is rather low in these circumstances. Keep this in mind, and I think this echoes what Laura said. International law only works when there's international resolve. And unless there is the political will to actually put it into place, then it remains fine words on a page.
Joanna, you are launching a petition today, I understand. Just tell us about it and how our viewers can get involved if they wish to support it.
Well, there are several international lawyers who have come together and decided to start a petition called Justice for Gaza. Now, the idea of Justice for Gaza is to request the ICC prosecutor to take the steps that he's able to take, which is firstly to open an investigation in Gaza, it's unexplainable how to this day, more than a month after, considering the amount of death and destruction that has happened, that this has not already been done. I want to know, why is there a double standard and why it hasn't been done yet? So the idea of the petition is to request in the first step for the ICC prosecutor to do that. And secondly, for the ICC prosecutor to look at individual criminal liability. What we're saying is the individuals who are leading this policy, with the understanding that there is no justification under which you can destroy civilians in such a way, these individuals have to face justice, have to answer in a courtroom and explain themselves. If they have answers and excuses to justify what they've done, fine, we'll hear them in court. So they need to be, first of all, there needs to be a warrant of arrest against them by the ICC prosecutor. And then we'll see if we can get them to court or not. But these are the first steps. And I need to say something that's very important. Under the ICC regime, there is no state immunity. This means that there is no head of state that can claim immunity for policies enacted and for policies implemented. This is very important because this means that these individuals who are committing these crimes cannot justify their actions by the fact that it was legal. It was legal under Israeli law because we're talking about a crime of the utmost gravity. So it is essential that people who wish to support these efforts, individuals of all walks of life, sign the petition, Justice for Gaza, and this petition will push the efforts and keep putting pressure on the ICC prosecutor to ask him to explain why are there double standards when it comes to Palestinians.
Thanks, Joanna. Lara, tell me, what will justice look like for the people of Gaza, in your view?
Well, I think we have to be asking a broader question about what will justice look like for Palestinians, who for over 7 decades have been denied the right to self-determination, and their most basic human rights continue to be violated day in and day out. I think, while Israel is certainly committing genocide, and it's important for the legitimacy of the international institutions like the ICC to investigate and prosecute this crime, we must remember that even if Israeli officials are found guilty of genocide as a result of their actions in Gaza for the last month, this still would not address the over 7 decades of injustice and impunity which has prevailed as a result of Israel's settler colonial project in Palestine. And that's really the heart of the issue. And I think that's precisely why calls for freedom from the river to the sea are so essential to the Palestinian struggle. What we are saying is that we are a people who live on the land between the river and the sea, and that we are a people whose human rights have been denied for over 7 decades. What we are not saying is that we want to deny any other group their human rights, but we are seeking the respect of our own human rights. And that's really what this is all about. That really leads us to the point that at its heart, Israel's apartheid regime must be dismantled, and that Palestinians need to see the day where they have all their human rights respected.
Ardi, how long do you think this military campaign by Israel will go on for?
I regret to say that I think it'll go on for as long as the Israelis believe it should continue until they can complete their stated goal. Their stated goal, however, is so broad, that is to destroy Hamas, their capability militarily and also civilly to govern, that will give them time to do what I think is the logical result of every one of their actions, as I mentioned earlier. We might look at what the Israelis are doing on the ground in Gaza and scratch our heads and say, well, that makes no sense. Why ever would they bombard hospitals? Why ever would they bombard refugee camps, civilian shelters, and so on? And the only rationale behind doing that is to create a great scare among the civilian population, such that they have imbued within them the idea that there's no place to be safe in Gaza, and that the only place for safety, the only place for continued life is outside of the Gaza Strip. I believe that the operational goals of the government of the State of Israel logically flow in that direction, and they will continue to do that until such time as the population of Gaza is dispersed, whether in one fell swoop over the course of another month or over time. We know the Israelis will continue to occupy physically with boots on the ground northern Gaza Strip, and quite possibly more, to sort of crunch the population into the southern portion, a population that is already besieged, a population that is in the millions, and so on. And this all leads in one direction, I'm afraid.
Ardi, and to all our panelists, thank you so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.